Now, what are you guys going to find in these agreements? First of all, most likely they're not written in humanese, they're not written in English, they're written in some kind of weird legal jargon. You can pretend to be a lawyer, you can try to figure out what it's saying. Even if you figure out what it's all about, you're still going to have questions. Contact us. We're dental lawyers. We read this stuff all the time. We'll explain to you. Our office is around the corner. You can drop by. We'll share stories. It's great. But in terms of the agreement that you guys are going to have to sign, the most important, other than your pay and your responsibilities, are these things called restrictive covenants. Dun, dun, dun. You're going to be all of a sudden forced to agree to these things that restrict you. What kinds of things? Well, first the dentist is going to say, those patient files, those patient records, they're mine. You're not to disclose anything. You're not to use them. You're not to take them away. They're just mine. So confidentiality, number one. Number two, during this whole relationship and for a period of time afterwards, you can't compete against me. You can't just open up shop down the street and start practicing dentistry. And number three, during the same contract and for a period of time afterwards, you can't leave and take my clients. So what do you think? Are these restrictive covenants enforceable? Yeah? Oh, who said that? I love that. I love that. That is genius. Depends on if they're reasonable. Okay, so David and I are going to teach you all the techniques that lawyers use. We have like an arsenal of like blah, blah, blah words to cut through these contracts to make them unreasonable or reasonable, right? It's all arguments. The law changes it's not black and white. It changes all the time, right? So what we do is we kind of put together these arguments to attack the reasonableness of this section. So let's start off with a non-compete, okay? Basically, you can't compete against me. First thing it's going to say is a period of time. Okay, could be 5 years after our relationship ends, could be 10 years, could be 1 year. Second thing it's going to say is a certain geographic area. 5 kilometers from, a location within the city of Toronto, something like that. And then it's going to say what you can't do. You can't compete by opening up a dental practice. So what is reasonable for non-competes? I'll tell you right now, good news. The Court of Appeal has said that if you're an employee and you're asked to sign something with a non-compete, it will, for the most part, be unenforceable. Just plain invalid. Why? It's too restrictive. There are other ways to protect the dentist and the dentist's interests than basically requiring you guys to get handcuffed and not be able to open up shop. So the first thing, if you're an employee, non-competes, unenforceable. Does that make sense? They're too restrictive. Now, what about the non-solicitation? Non-solicitation meaning you will not come after our patients after you move. You won't come after our employees. You won't even approach the other dentists that send us business. Okay? Courts have said these are enforceable, but they have to be reasonable. Okay? So what is reasonable? Is a 10-year non-solicitation clause reasonable? Most likely not. Is a non-solicitation clause covering the whole province of Ontario reasonable? No. And, so the courts will look at the reasonableness of the non-solicit, and they'll pick it apart and they'll say, is that reasonable? Now, I'm saying this in the context of you guys as employees. What about independent contractors? What about if you go to sell your business and the purchaser, another dentist, says, you know what, I want you to sign a non-compete and a non-solicit because you're selling your practice, and I just don't want you to just set up down the street. I want you to agree not to do these things. Are those enforceable in that context? That context is completely different from an employment context. And the courts have said, what? Yes or no? Still not enforceable, young lady? I caught her with her mouth full of pizza. That's great. What do you think? Yeah. You think they're enforceable? Why?
Because then it'd be like a scam. Somebody sets up shop, walk down the road.
Very good. Courts have said that if you're selling your practice, it's only fair. The other guy buying it has a legitimate interest that needs protection, so we will enforce these non-competes and non-solicits in the non-employment context. Now, reasonableness is one way to attack these restrictive covenants. How else can we attack them, David? I'm going to turn it over to David. David's going to give you a whole arsenal of things to think about when you read through these things.
I'm actually, if I can scare you guys first, everything Michael has been saying to you is looking at it through your eyes. Don't forget, when you're entering into a business relationship, you're not talking to the wall, you're not talking to the mirror. You're talking to another person or their representative that has their own set of interests and their own set of ideas, and they're going to try to do what's best for them. I'm not saying the whole world is crazy and out for themselves. You know, when you enter into a business relationship, the hope is you're going in with smiles and handshakes, because the dream is everyone's going to make $1 million and live happily ever after. But for the people who are at least taking their business interests seriously at whatever point in time, they're going to start trying to set up protections and at least knowing what they believe their rights to be. So if I'm the big, bad, scary hiring dentist, I'm going to be looking to have a restrictive covenant and clause in the contract that's going to say you can't work anywhere near me for the longest period of time, and I'm going to set a very wide geographical area. But ways that those, so that's looking from the hiring side, and they're going to have their own lawyers crafting unique arguments to try to say why they are enforceable. But Michael already mentioned in terms of reasonableness, you've got geographic location, you've got time frame. You also want to have clarity. There seems to be a little bit of a shift, sort of, I guess almost colloquially you can say that employment's almost become the same, see, lawyer speak. Employment's almost become like a human right. So the courts are very, very cautious in terms of limiting the rights of someone to earn an income, provide for themselves, provide for a family, and develop their business career. So clarity of drafting is very, very important. This maybe goes back to your point about what if you have a muddled contract. Muddled contracts make lawyers rich. Don't work on that, working on making yourself rich and serving your dental patients. So one way to attack right away is just the wordiness and the language used in the contract. It's the easiest way to rip something apart.
I'm going to give you guys a quick example here. Okay, there was a case out in BC, and it didn't involve dentists, but it involved insurance brokers. Okay, and the insurance broker agreed not to solicit the customers of this brokerage for a period of time in the metropolitan city of Vancouver. Okay, now for those of you who know, there's no such thing as metropolitan city of Vancouver. It's just the city of Vancouver. This case went from BC lower courts all the way up to the Supreme Court. It was such a huge deal, right? And so the Supreme Court's sitting there going, well, what do we do? Do we fix this for them? Did they have any idea of what the heck metropolitan city of Vancouver meant at the time? Should we, delete it? What do you think they did? Would it be fair to readjust the contract? This will show you how you can attack something if it's not very precise. What do you think? Right in the front. That's what you get for sitting there.
I don't think you can attack it if it's not precise.
Okay.
I don't think you can attack it. If it's not precise,
yeah,
I don't think you can.
I think you're trying to say if it's not precise, you can attack it.
You can attack it. It's
Correct. Yeah. See? He's my client. I speak on his behalf here. Exactly. Supreme Court said, this is bupkis. I can't do anything with this. No non-solicitation clause, unenforceable, invalid. Get your city correct.